I was your home. And you chose a hotel.
The coffee was still hot when I realized my wife had been lying to me for months. Not about the small stuff. Everyone lies about forgetting to pick up milk or whether they actually listened when you complained about your boss. I'm talking about the kind of lies that reshape your entire world. The ones that make you question every conversation you've had for the past year. My name is Sam Sullivan, and I used to think I was pretty good at reading people. 20 years as an insurance investigator will do that to you. You learn to spot the tells, the nervous tics, the way someone's eyes dart left when they're constructing a story instead of remembering one. But apparently, all that experience meant nothing when it came to my own wife. Elaine was at the kitchen counter, her back to me, fingers flying across her phone screen with the kind of intensity usually reserved for emergency room surgeons. Her auburn hair was pulled back in that messy bun she claimed was effortless, but took her 20 minutes to perfect. She was wearing her navy blazer, the one that meant she had an important meeting today. "Running late again?" I asked, settling into my usual chair at our small breakfast table. The Victorian house we'd bought 15 years ago had a kitchen that was supposed to be charming, according to the realtor. But mostly it just felt cramped when we were both in it. "Client emergency," she said without turning around. "The Henderson account is imploding, and apparently I'm the only one who can fix it." Zach, I nodded, though she couldn't see me. Elaine worked at Morrison & Associates, one of the bigger advertising agencies in our mid-sized New England city. She'd climbed from junior account executive to senior strategist in just 8 years, and she never let anyone forget it, including me. "Will you be home for dinner?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Probably not. This could go late." She finally turned around and I caught something in her expression. A flicker of something that wasn't quite guilt, but wasn't innocence either. "Don't wait up." She grabbed her coffee mug and headed for the door, pausing to give me a quick kiss on the cheek. Her lips were already glossy with that expensive lipstick she'd started wearing recently, the one that cost more than my lunch budget for a week. "Love you," she called over her shoulder, and then she was gone, leaving behind the faint scent of her new perfume and the lingering feeling that something was off. I sat there for a moment, staring at the spot where she'd been standing. This had become our morning routine over the past few months. Her rushing off to some crisis, me sitting alone with my coffee and growing suspicion. It wasn't any one thing that bothered me. It was the accumulation of small details that didn't quite add up. The late nights that had become standard. The way she guarded her phone like it contained state secrets. The new clothes, the expensive perfume, the sudden interest in working out that had her at the gym until 8 p.m. 3 nights a week. And then there were the phone calls she took in the other room, speaking in hushed tones about strategy sessions and client confidentiality. Melee Van danced into the kitchen, still in his pajamas, despite the fact that his school bus would arrive in 30 minutes. At 14, he'd perfected the art of moving just slowly enough to make everyone around him nervous about being late. "Mom gone already?" he asked, opening the refrigerator and staring into it like he expected its contents to have magically changed overnight. "Client emergency," I said. He made a non-committal noise and grabbed the orange juice. "She's been having a lot of those lately." Misled out of the mouths of babes. Even Ethan had noticed the pattern. "Your mom works hard," I said, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. "Yeah, I know." He poured himself a glass of juice and leaned against the counter. "Dad, are you and Mom okay?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut, mainly because I wasn't sure how to answer it. Were we okay? I honestly didn't know anymore. Why would you ask that? Admiration, shrugged, suddenly fascinated by his orange juice. "I don't know. You guys just seem different lately. Like you're both pretending everything's fine, but it's not." Paycheck. Smart kid. Too smart for his own good, maybe. "Things are fine between your mom and me," I said, hating myself for lying to him. Sometimes adults go through stressful periods at work, and it can affect how they act at home. It doesn't mean anything's wrong with the marriage. Marriage. He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. I could tell he wasn't entirely convinced. Heck, I wasn't entirely convinced either. After Ethan left for school, I found myself alone in the house with my thoughts and a growing sense of unease. I'd been trying to ignore the warning signs for weeks, telling myself I was being paranoid, that 20 years of investigating insurance fraud had made me suspicious of everyone, including my own wife. But paranoia and intuition aren't always different things. I walked upstairs to our bedroom and stood in the doorway, looking around like I was seeing it for the first time. Everything looked normal. The unmade bed, Elaine's reading glasses on the nightstand, the stack of advertising trade magazines she never seemed to actually read. But normal didn't mean innocent. I opened her dresser drawer, the one where she kept her jewelry and personal items. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew I'd recognize it when I saw it. Hidden underneath a stack of scarves, I found a receipt from Romano's, an upscale Italian restaurant downtown. The date was from 2 weeks ago, a Tuesday night, when she'd told me she was working late on the Henderson account. The receipt was for 2 meals, 2 glasses of wine, and dessert. The total was over $150. I stared at the piece of paper, my hands shaking slightly. There could be an innocent explanation. Maybe she'd taken a client to dinner. Maybe it was a business meeting that ran long and turned into a meal. Maybe I was reading too much into a simple receipt. But then I looked at the items ordered. 2 orders of the ossobuco, Romano's signature dish. 2 glasses of their most expensive Chianti. Tiramisu for dessert. This wasn't a business dinner, this was a romantic evening. I folded the receipt carefully and put it back where I'd found it. My heart was pounding, and I felt sick to my stomach. Part of me wanted to confront Elaine immediately, to demand an explanation and clear the air. But the investigator in me knew better. One receipt wasn't proof of anything, not really. It was just the first piece of evidence in what might be a much larger puzzle. I needed to know more before I made any accusations. I needed to be sure. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine activities that felt anything but routine. I went to my office, processed some claims, made phone calls to contractors and adjusters. But my mind kept drifting back to that receipt, to the way Elaine had avoided eye contact that morning, to Ethan's innocent question about whether his parents were okay. By the time I got home that evening, I'd made a decision. If Elaine was having an affair, I was going to find out. And if she wasn't, well, then at least I could stop driving myself crazy with suspicion. But first, I needed help. And I knew exactly who to call. Detective Ray Halloran had been my partner for 6 years before I left the force to become an insurance investigator. He was the kind of cop who believed in shoe leather and intuition over fancy technology and psychological profiles. More importantly, he was the kind of friend who would help you bury a body without asking too many questions. Though in this case, I was hoping it wouldn't come to that. I found him at Richie's Bar, a dive on the east side of town that catered to cops, ex-cops, and people who wanted to drink in peace without worrying about trendy cocktails or artisanal anything. Ray was at his usual spot at the end of the bar, nursing a beer and reading a paperback thriller that looked like it had been through a washing machine. "Sully," he said, without looking up from his book. "You look like heck." "Thanks. You always know just what to say." Ray closed his book and studied my face with the kind of attention that had made him a good detective. "What's eating you?" Afflicta ordered a beer from Richie, who nodded and moved away without comment. Richie understood the value of privacy, which was one of the reasons his bar had become an unofficial headquarters for anyone who needed to have conversations that shouldn't be overheard. "I think Elaine's having an affair," I said quietly. Ray didn't react with surprise or sympathy. He just nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. "What makes you think so?" I told him about the late nights, the secretive phone calls, the receipt from Romano's. As I talked, Ray listened without interruption, his expression neutral but attentive. "Could be innocent," he said when I finished. "Could be she's planning a surprise party for your birthday or something. My birthday's not for 6 months. Could be she's planning way ahead. Okay, probably not a surprise party," he admitted. "What do you want me to do about it?" "I need to know for sure, one way or the other." Ray took a long pull from his beer. "You sure you want to go down this road, Sully? Sometimes ignorance really is bliss. I need to know. He was quiet for a moment, considering. Okay, but we do this right. No breaking and entering, no illegal surveillance, no wiretapping. Everything by the book. I expect anything less. I'll see what I can dig up. We shook hands, and I felt a mixture of relief and dread. Relief that I wasn't going to have to handle this alone, and dread at what Ray might discover. I was halfway home when my phone rang. Elaine's name appeared on the screen. Hey, I said, trying to sound normal. Hi, honey. Listen, I'm going to be really late tonight. This Henderson thing is turning into a complete disaster, and we've got the whole team here trying to salvage it. How late is really late? How late is really late? Probably not until after midnight. Don't wait up, okay? Sure, I said. Good luck with the crisis. Thanks. Love you. Before I could respond, I sat in my car for a few minutes, staring at my phone. Then I made a decision that probably wasn't very smart, but felt necessary. Instead of going home, I drove downtown to the Morrison & Associates building. The agency occupied the top 3 floors of a renovated brick building that had once housed a department store. Even at 8 p.m., there were lights on in several windows. I parked across the street and settled in to wait. I felt ridiculous. Here I was, a 41-year-old man sitting in his car like some kind of stalker, spying on his own wife. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, and sitting at home wondering wasn't going to give me any answers. At 9:30, people started leaving the building. I recognized a few faces from the agency's Christmas parties, account executives and creative types heading home after what was probably a genuinely long day. But I didn't see Elaine. At 10:15, she finally appeared, but she wasn't alone. The man walking beside her was tall and lean, with the kind of carefully styled hair that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. He was wearing an expensive suit and carrying himself with the confidence of someone who'd never had to worry about money. I recognized him from the Christmas parties, too. Julian Mercer, one of the agency's senior strategists. They stood on the sidewalk in front of the building, talking quietly. Even from across the street, I could see that this wasn't a casual conversation between colleagues. There was something intimate about the way they stood close together, the way Julian leaned in to whisper something that made Elaine laugh. Then Julian reached out and touched Elaine's arm, letting his hand linger there for just a moment too long. She didn't pull away. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I wanted to get out of the car, march across the street, and demand to know what the heck was going on. But I forced myself to stay put and keep watching. After a few more minutes of conversation, they walked to the parking garage next to the building. I waited, and a few minutes later, 2 cars emerged. Julian's silver BMW led the way, with Elaine's Honda following close behind. I followed them at a distance, my heart pounding. They drove through downtown, past the business district, and into one of the nicer residential neighborhoods. Finally, they pulled into the parking lot of the Riverside Inn, a boutique hotel that catered to business travelers and people having affairs. I parked at the far end of the lot and watched as they got out of their cars. Julian went to the trunk of his BMW and pulled out a small overnight bag. Elaine looked around nervously, then followed him toward the hotel entrance. I sat there for a long time after they disappeared inside, staring at the hotel and trying to process what I'd just seen. Part of me wanted to storm into the lobby and confront them. Part of me wanted to drive home and pretend this had never happened. But mostly, I just felt numb. My phone buzzed with a text message from Elaine. Going to be here all night. See you in the morning. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, Good luck. Love you too. The lie felt bitter in my mouth, but I sent it anyway. I drove home through empty streets, my mind racing. The evidence was pretty compelling. The receipt from Romano's, the late nights, the secretive behavior, and now this. But Ray was right about doing things by the book. I needed more than just my own observations before I could make any decisions about what to do next. The house felt different when I walked in, like it belonged to someone else. Everything looked the same. The family photos on the mantel, Ethan's backpack by the front door, the stack of mail on the kitchen counter. But it all felt like props in a play I didn't remember auditioning for. I poured myself a drink and sat in my recliner, staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out how I'd gotten here. 15 years of marriage, and I thought I knew Elaine better than anyone. We'd been through the usual ups and downs: financial stress, parenting disagreements, the occasional fight about whose turn it was to take out the garbage. But I'd never doubted that we were solid, that we were in it for the long haul. Apparently, I'd been wrong about that too. My phone rang, jolting me out of my thoughts. It was Ray. "You okay?" he asked without preamble. "Not really. Why?" "Just checking. Sometimes when people start down this road, they do stupid things." "Don't do anything stupid, Sully." "I won't. I mean it. No confrontations, no dramatic scenes. Let me handle the investigation." "Okay. Terrorists. And Sully, try to get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." He hung up, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the growing certainty that my marriage was over. The Sullivan family reunion happened every year at the same rented banquet hall, complete with the same folding tables, the same questionable catering, and the same collection of relatives who spent most of the year avoiding each other. This year felt different, though. This year, I was walking into that room knowing that my wife was sleeping with another man. And somehow, I had to pretend everything was normal. Elaine had come home that morning around 6 a.m., claiming she'd fallen asleep at the office and just woke up. She looked tired, but there was something else in her expression, a kind of guilty satisfaction that made my stomach turn. She showered and changed clothes, chattering about the Henderson account crisis as if nothing had happened. "The whole team pulled an all-nighter," she said, applying her makeup in the bathroom mirror. "But I think we saved it. Julian came up with this brilliant strategy that completely turned things around. Aggression, of course." "Of course. That's great," I said, my voice flat. She glanced at me in the mirror. "You okay? You seem tense. Restless. Just tired. Didn't sleep well. Try to perk up for the reunion. Your family already thinks I'm some kind of ice queen. I don't need them thinking I'm married to a zombie, too." The reunion was being held at the Riverside Community Center, the same place we'd been meeting for the past 10 years. The Sullivan clan wasn't huge, but we were loud and opinionated, which made up for our lack of numbers. My father had been the oldest of 4 brothers, and between them they'd produced a dozen grandchildren, who were now adults with kids of their own. Ethan rode with us, complaining about having to wear a button-down shirt and spend his Saturday afternoon with relatives he saw once a year. I sympathized with him, but for different reasons. "Do I have to stay for the whole thing?" he asked from the back seat. "Yes," Elaine said firmly. "Family is important. These people love you, and you should spend time with them." I almost laughed at the irony. Elaine lecturing our son about family loyalty while she was screwing around with her coworker. But I kept my mouth shut and focused on driving. The community center was already crowded when we arrived. My cousin Mike was manning the grill outside, wearing an apron that said, "Kiss the cook," and holding court with a beer in one hand and a spatula in the other. My Aunt Susan was arranging folding chairs with military precision, barking orders at anyone who got too close. Uncle Tommy was setting up the sound system for what would inevitably become an impromptu karaoke session later in the evening. "Sam!" My father's brother, Uncle Joe, grabbed me in a bear hug that lifted me off my feet. "How the heck are you, kid?" "Uncle Joe, really good." He held me at arm's length and studied my face. "You sure? You look like someone stole your lunch money." Before I could answer, he'd moved on to Elaine, giving her the same enthusiastic greeting. She smiled and played the part of the loving wife perfectly, asking about his grandchildren and complimenting his new haircut. If I didn't know better, I'd think she was genuinely happy to be there. The afternoon progressed with the usual family reunion activities. Too much food, too many stories I'd heard a dozen times before, and the inevitable arguments about politics that everyone agreed to avoid but somehow never managed to. I found myself watching Elaine throughout the day, looking for signs of guilt or discomfort. But she seemed completely at ease. It was during dinner that things went sideways. We were all seated around the long tables, working our way through Uncle Mike's burgers and Aunt Susan's famous potato salad, when Elaine leaned over and whispered something to Ethan. He looked confused for a moment, then shook his head. She whispered again, more insistently this time. Finally, Ethan stood up and cleared his throat. The room gradually quieted as everyone turned to look at him. He said, his voice cracking slightly. My mom wanted me to say something. I felt a chill run down my spine. Whatever was coming, I knew it wasn't good. She wanted me to tell everyone that, he paused, looking uncomfortable, that my dad isn't a safe person to be around anymore. The silence that followed was deafening. Every eye in the room turned to me, and I could feel my face burning with embarrassment and rage. What? Uncle Joe's voice cut through the silence like a knife. Elaine put her hand on Ethan's shoulder, her expression a perfect mask of concerned motherhood. I didn't want to make a scene, but I felt like everyone should know. Sam has been unstable lately. Angry, paranoid, making accusations. I'm worried about what he might do. The room erupted in confused murmurs and shocked whispers. I sat there, frozen, as my own family looked at me with suspicion and concern. That's BS, Uncle Joe said loudly. Sam's one of the most level-headed people I know. I know it's hard to believe, Elaine said, her voice trembling with what sounded like genuine emotion. But he's been following me, going through my things, accusing me of having an affair. Yesterday, he threatened to hurt me if I didn't confess to something I didn't do. Mirrors, louder this time. I could see doubt creeping into some faces, concern into others. I stood up slowly, my hands shaking with rage. That's interesting, Elaine. Tell them where you were last night. I was at work, dealing with a client crisis. You know that. Really? Because I saw you go into the Riverside Inn with Julian Mercer at 10:30 p.m. Reinstalled, the room went dead silent again. Elaine's face went pale, but she recovered quickly. See? She said, her voice rising. This is exactly what I'm talking about. He's been stalking me, following me around, making up these paranoid fantasies. Julian is a colleague. We were having a business meeting. Restrictions. At a hotel? With an overnight bag? I don't have to justify my work schedule to you, Sam, especially not in front of your family. Reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the receipt I'd found in her dresser. What about this? Romano's, 2 weeks ago. 2 dinners, 2 glasses of wine, dessert. On a Tuesday night when you told me you were working late on the Henderson account. Elaine's eyes widened as she recognized the receipt. For just a moment, her mask slipped, and I saw panic flash across her face. Where did you get that? She whispered. From your dresser drawer, along with the credit card statements showing 3 more dinners at expensive restaurants. All on nights when you claimed to be working late. The room was completely silent now. Even the kids had stopped talking and were staring at us with wide eyes. You went through my personal things? Elaine's voice was getting higher, more desperate. You invaded my privacy, violated my trust, and now you're trying to humiliate me in front of your family? I'm trying to get some honest answers for once. Elaine looked around the room at all the faces staring at her, then back at me. For a moment, I thought she might break down and confess everything. Instead, she grabbed her purse and headed for the door. I don't have to listen to this, she said. When you're ready to get help for your problems, Sam, let me know. Until then, Ethan and I will be staying somewhere safe. Shoreline, she looked at our son. Come on, honey, we're leaving. Ethan looked confused and scared. Mom, what's going on? Your father is sick, sweetheart. He needs help, but until he gets it, we can't stay in the same house with him. I'm not going anywhere, Ethan said quietly. Dad, did you really follow Mom? Marshall, I looked at my son. This kid who was caught in the middle of something he shouldn't have to deal with, and made a decision. Yes, I said. I followed her because I suspected she was lying to me, and I was right. Thickness nodded slowly, then looked at his mother. Were you really working last night? Elaine's face crumpled. I feel like the Julian's the join with leader in self-infectively, as responsibly, when she was tasked to stead. Elaine's looked at my son. I still not really. Elaine's face crumpled. It's complicated, honey. Adult relationships are complicated. That's not an answer, Mom. The room was so quiet, you could hear the air conditioning humming. Finally, Uncle Joe stood up. Elaine, he said, his voice calm but firm. I've known Sam his whole life. He's not perfect, but he's not a liar. If he says he saw you at a hotel with another man, then that's what happened. Other family members began nodding and murmuring agreement. Elaine looked around desperately, realizing she was losing the room. "Fine," she said, her voice breaking. "Fine. You all want to take his side, go ahead. But don't come crying to me when he snaps completely." She stormed out, leaving Ethan standing there looking lost and confused. Uncle Joe put his arm around my shoulders. "You okay, kid?" Marginalized. They nodded, though I wasn't sure if that was true. "I will be." "What do you need?" I looked around the room at all these people who had known me since I was born, who had just witnessed my marriage implode in spectacular fashion, and who were still standing by me. "A good lawyer," I said, "and maybe a drink." "I can help with both of those," Uncle Joe said with a grim smile. As the family rallied around me and Ethan, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Maybe my marriage was over, but I wasn't alone. And now that the truth was out in the open, I could start figuring out what came next. Starting with making sure Julian Mercer understood exactly what kind of man he'd chosen to cross. Ray Halloran called me at 7 a.m. the next morning, which meant he'd been working since dawn. That was Ray. When he committed to something, he went all in. "Meet me at Richie's in an hour," he said without preamble. "And bring coffee. Good coffee. Not the swill they serve at that place." I found him in a corner booth, surrounded by file folders and looking like he'd been up all night, which, knowing Ray, he probably had been. "Jesus, Ray, did you sleep at all?" "Sleep is for people who don't have cheating spouses to investigate." He looked up from the papers spread across the table. "How'd things go at the family reunion?" I told him about the confrontation, about Elaine's dramatic exit, and her attempt to paint me as an unstable stalker. Ray listened without comment, occasionally making notes in his small notebook. "Where's she staying now?" he asked when I finished. "I don't know. She took some clothes from the house yesterday evening while I was out with Ethan. Left a note saying she'd be in touch through her lawyer." "And the kid?" "Ethan's staying with me. He's pretty shaken up, but he knows his mother was lying. Smart kid." Ray nodded and pushed one of the folders across the table. "Speaking of smart kids, your wife's boyfriend isn't as clever as he thinks he is." I opened the folder and found myself looking at a comprehensive background report on Julian Mercer. Ray had been busy. "Julian Marcus Mercer, age 45, Ray began, reading from his notes. "Born in Connecticut. Grew up in one of those rich suburbs where the average house costs more than most people make in a lifetime. Went to private schools, then Yale for undergrad and Harvard for his MBA. Trust fund baby? His grandfather founded a textile company that got bought out by a bigger corporation in the 80s. Julian's been living off the interest ever since. The job at Morrison & Associates is more hobby than necessity. Invoke through the pages, looking at financial records, employment history, and personal information. Married? That's where it gets interesting." Ray leaned forward, his eyes bright with the thrill of discovery. "Divorced twice. First wife lasted 3 years before she caught him cheating with her best friend. Second wife made it 5 years, but she filed for divorce citing irreconcilable differences, which usually means she found out about his affairs, but didn't want to air the dirty laundry in court. So he's got a pattern. Gets better. I talked to a private investigator who worked the second divorce case. Apparently, Julian has a thing for married women. Something about the challenge, the secrecy, the thrill of breaking up happy homes. I felt my jaw clench. What else? He's got a gambling problem. Nothing huge, but he drops a few thousand at the casino every month. Plays poker with some high-stakes guys downtown. And here's the kicker. He's been bragging to his poker buddies about his latest conquest. Ray pulled out a small digital recorder and set it on the table. One of the guys at the poker game is a retired cop who owes me a favor. He recorded this conversation from last week. He pressed play, and I heard Julian's voice, slightly slurred from alcohol, but perfectly clear. "She's completely hooked. Thinks I'm going to leave my whole life behind and run away with her. It's almost too easy, you know? These suburban wives, they're so desperate for excitement, for someone to make them feel special again. Tell them what they want to hear, take them to some nice restaurants, and they'll throw away everything they've built. Another voice, older and rougher. What about the husband? Julian laughed. Insurance investigator. Boring as heck. She says he's getting suspicious, but what's he going to do? File for divorce? She'll take him for everything he's worth, and then some. And the kid? That's the beauty of it. She's already talking about how her husband is unstable, how she's afraid for her safety. By the time this is over, she'll have full custody and a nice fat alimony check every month. And I'll be there to help her spend it. Relentless. More laughter. Then the recording ended. I sat there staring at the recorder, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. It was one thing to know your wife was cheating. It was another to hear her lover discussing the destruction of your life like it was some kind of game. There's more, Ray said quietly. I did some digging into their timeline. Based on credit card records and witness statements, they've been seeing each other for at least 4 months, maybe longer. I thought back to when Elaine had started working late, when she'd begun buying new clothes and wearing expensive perfume. It all lined up. What about the agency? Do they know? Officially, no, but there are rumors. Julian's got a reputation as a player, and people have noticed him and Elaine spending a lot of time together. I talked to a few employees off the record. They're not surprised. I closed the folder and leaned back in the booth. So what now? Now we build a case. Document everything, gather evidence, make sure you're protected when this goes to court. Because it is going to court, Sully. She's going to try to take you for everything, just like Julian said. Kind of evidence? Ray smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. The kind that shows Julian Mercer exactly what happens when he messes with the wrong family. The next hour, Ray laid out his plan. It was thorough, methodical, and completely legal, which was important since we were both ex-cops who knew better than to cross certain lines. First, we'd document the affair with photographs and witness statements. Ray had already identified the hotels they'd been using and had contacts who could provide records of their visits. Second, we'd gather financial evidence, showing how Elaine had been using family money to fund her affair. The expensive dinners, the new clothes, the gifts she'd probably been buying for Julian. Third, we'd expose Julian's pattern of targeting married women and his habit of bragging about his conquests. Ray had already reached out to the ex-wives, and both were willing to testify about Julian's character if necessary. The goal isn't just to win the divorce, Ray explained. It's to make sure they both understand there are consequences for what they've done. What kind of consequences? The legal kind, the financial kind, the social kind. By the time we're done, Julian's reputation will be in ruins, and Elaine will be lucky to get supervised visitation with Ethan. I felt a surge of satisfaction at the thought, followed immediately by guilt. This was still my wife we were talking about, the mother of my child. But then I remembered Julian's voice on that recording, talking about destroying my life like it was a joke, and the guilt faded. When do we start? We already have. I've got surveillance unless I've got surveillance on both of them starting today. Within a week, we'll have enough evidence to bury them both. Ray gathered up his files and stood to leave. One more thing, Sully. This is going to get ugly before it gets better. They're going to fight back, probably try to make you look like the bad guy. Are you ready for that? I thought about Ethan, confused and hurt by his mother's betrayal. I thought about my family, rallying around me at the reunion. I thought about Julian Mercer, laughing with his poker buddies about destroying my marriage for sport. Yeah, I said. I'm ready. Sluggish Reyes nodded and headed for the door. Good. Because it's time to show them what happens when they mess with the wrong guy. As I watched him leave, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. A sense of purpose. For too long, I'd been reacting to events, letting Elaine and Julian control the narrative. Now, it was my turn to take charge. The hunt had begun. The photographs Ray showed me 3 days later were worse than I'd expected. Not because they were explicit, they weren't, but because they showed a side of Elaine I'd never seen before. In every shot, she looked happy, in a way that had nothing to do with me or our life together. Riverside Inn again, Ray said, sliding the pictures across the table at Richie's bar. Same room they used last week. They're creatures of habit, which makes our job easier. I studied the images. Elaine and Julian walking into the hotel lobby. Julian's hand on the small of her back. The two of them at the hotel bar, leaning close together over drinks. Julian kissing her goodnight by her car in the parking garage. How long were they there? 4 hours. Left separately about 10 minutes apart. Very careful. Very professional. They've done this before. The next folder contained financial records that told an even more alarming story. Over the past 4 months, Elaine had spent nearly $8,000 of our joint savings on restaurants, hotels, and gifts. Money that was supposed to be for Ethan's college fund and our retirement. She's been covering her tracks pretty well, Ray explained. Using cash for most things. Paying for hotels with a credit card I didn't know she had. But money leaves a trail if you know where to look. What about Julian? What's he contributing to this relationship? Ray's smile was grim. That's the best part. According to my sources, he's been telling Elaine that he's cash poor right now because his trust fund is tied up in some legal dispute. So she's been paying for everything. He's funding her own affair? With your money, yeah. Gets better, though. Remember that gambling problem I mentioned? Julian's been on a losing streak lately. Owes some serious money to some serious people. Word is, he's been looking for a way to solve his financial problems. The implication hit me like a sledgehammer. He's using her, like a personal ATM, and she has no idea. I felt a strange mixture of anger and pity. Elaine was destroying our marriage for a man who saw her as nothing more than a convenient source of income. It would have been almost sad if it wasn't so infuriating. There's something else, Ray said, pulling out another folder. I tracked down Julian's ex-wives. Both of them are willing to talk. The first ex-wife, Catherine, had provided a written statement describing Julian's pattern of infidelity and financial manipulation. The second ex-wife, Maria, had gone even further, agreeing to testify in court if necessary. Maria's story is particularly interesting, Ray said. Julian convinced her to invest in some business venture that turned out to be a scam. She lost $50,000 before she figured out he was behind it. He's done this before, multiple times. The guy's a professional predator. He finds vulnerable women, usually married ones with access to money, and bleeds them dry while convincing them he loves them. Hit about Elaine, so proud of her intelligence and business acumen, being manipulated by a con man who saw her coming from a mile away. Part of me wanted to warn her, to save her from the humiliation that was coming. But then, I remembered her standing in front of my family, calling me unstable and dangerous, and that impulse faded. What's our next move? We spring the trap. I've arranged for Julian to get an invitation to a poker game tomorrow night. High stakes, the kind he can't resist. While he's there, losing money he doesn't have, you're going to pay Elaine a visit. What kind of visit? Reyes pulled out a thick manila envelope. The kind where you present her with evidence of what Julian's really up to, and give her a chance to come clean before this gets even uglier. I looked at the envelope, knowing it contained enough evidence to destroy both Elaine and Julian. And if she doesn't take the deal? That we go nuclear. Full disclosure to the divorce court, to her employer, to anyone who will listen. By the time we're done, they'll both be radioactive. That evening, I sat in my car outside the apartment complex where Elaine was staying, gathering my courage for what was going to be a very difficult conversation. She was renting a furnished one-bedroom unit in a complex that catered to people going through divorces. Temporary housing for temporary situations. I'd called ahead, so she was expecting me. When she opened the door, I was struck by how tired she looked. The confident, put-together woman I'd been married to for 15 years had been replaced by someone who looked worn down and defensive. "Sam," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Come in." The apartment was generic and depressing. Beige walls, rental furniture, the kind of place where people waited for their real lives to start again. Elaine had tried to make it homey with a few personal items, but it just looked sad. "How's Ethan?" she asked, settling into a chair across from me. Confused, hurt, wondering why his mother is more interested in destroying his father than in taking care of her family. Millennium flinched. "That's not fair," shuffled. "Isn't it?" I pulled out the manila envelope and set it on the coffee table between us. We need to talk, Elaine. Really talk. No lies, no games, no manipulation. Just the truth. She stared at the envelope like it might explode. What's that? Evidence. Photographs, financial records, witness statements. Everything I need to prove what you've been doing and who you've been doing it with. Timeouts. Sam, I can explain. Julian Mercer, I said, cutting her off. 45 years old, trust fund baby. Divorced twice for cheating. Currently owes about $30,000 to some very unpleasant people because of his gambling problem. Mailbox's face went pale. How do you? I'm an investigator, Elaine. It's what I do. I leaned forward. Did you know he's been bragging to his poker buddies about how easy you are to manipulate? How he's got you convinced that I'm the problem in our marriage while you fund his lifestyle with our money? That's not... He wouldn't... I pulled out the digital recorder and played Julian's voice. These suburban wives, they're so desperate for excitement, for someone to make them feel special again. Tell them what they want to hear, take them to some nice restaurants, and they'll throw away everything they've built. Elaine listened to the recording with growing horror, her hand covering her mouth. When it finished, she was crying. He said he loved me, she whispered. He loves your money, our money. The money you've been stealing from our family to pay for hotel rooms and expensive dinners. I opened the envelope and spread the financial records across the table. $8,000, Elaine. $8,000 from Ethan's college fund, so you could play house with a con man who sees you as his personal piggy bank. She stared at the papers, the evidence of her betrayal laid out in black and white. What do you want from me? I want you to end it. Today. I want you to come home and try to salvage what's left of our family. I want you to get counseling and figure out why you were willing to throw away 15 years of marriage for a man who's been laughing at you behind your back. Elaine was quiet for a long time, studying the evidence. Finally, she looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. And if I don't? Then tomorrow morning, copies of everything in that envelope go to your boss, your coworkers, your friends, and anyone else who might be interested in knowing what kind of person you really are. Julian gets the same treatment. By the end of the week, everyone in town will know exactly what you two have been up to. You're blackmailing me. I'm giving you a choice. The same choice you should have given me before you decided to destroy our marriage. Elaine picked up one of the photographs, the one of Julian kissing her in the parking garage, and stared at it for a long moment. I need time to think, she said finally. You have until tomorrow morning. After that, the choice gets made for you. I stood to leave, then turned back. For what it's worth, Elaine, I really hoped it wouldn't come to this. I hoped we could work things out like adults. But you made your choice when you decided to humiliate me in front of my family and try to turn my son against me. She didn't respond, just sat there holding the photograph and crying. I left her there and drove home, feeling like I'd just crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Tomorrow, one way or another, this would all be over. Elaine didn't call. By 10 a.m. the next morning, I knew she'd made her choice. Ray had been watching Julian's apartment, and at 9:30, Elaine's Honda had pulled into the parking lot. She was doubling down, betting everything on a man who saw her as nothing more than a convenient source of income. She went up to his place about 20 minutes ago, Ray reported over the phone. Looked upset, but she went up anyway. Then we proceed as planned. You sure about this, Sully? Once we pull this trigger, there's no going back. I thought about Ethan, getting ready for school and trying to pretend his family wasn't falling apart. I thought about my relatives at the reunion, watching Elaine try to destroy my reputation to cover her own sins. I thought about Julian's voice on that recording, laughing about how easy it was to manipulate my wife. I'm sure. The first call I made was to Morrison and Associates. I asked to speak with the managing partner, a woman named Patricia Hoffman, whom I'd met at several agency social events over the years. Sam Sullivan, she said when she came on the line. How are you? I heard you and Elaine were having some difficulties. That's actually why I'm calling, Patricia. I have some information I think you should see regarding 2 of your employees. There was a pause. What kind of information? The kind that could expose your agency to significant liability if it's not handled properly. Can we meet this morning? An hour later, I was meet in the chapter former simplement. An hour later, I was field the school. The kind that could expose your agency to significant liability if it's not handled properly. An hour later, which is an increasingly form-dependent. The kind that could expose your agency to significant liability if it's not handled properly. An hour later, which is an increasingly love-dependent. That wasn't to completely reveal the school of her. I found out instantness. The kind that could expose your agency to significant liability if it's not handled properly. Against the vice when you and your partner. The kind that could expose your agency to significant liability if it's not handled properly. I think it's a very interesting. I was sitting in Patricia Hoffman's corner office, watching her review the contents of Ray's envelope. She was a sharp woman in her 50s, who'd built Morrison and Associates from a small local shop into a regional powerhouse. She didn't get where she was by tolerating drama or liability. "How long has this been going on?" she asked, studying the photographs. "At least 4 months, possibly longer." "And you're certain these were taken at business events they claimed to be attending?" "Check your records. Every time they claimed to be working late on the Henderson account, they were actually at the Riverside Inn." Pa made some notes on a legal pad. "What do you want from me, Sam?" "I want them fired, both of them, today. And I want it made clear that their termination was for cause, so Elaine can't claim unemployment or severance. That's a serious request. It's a serious situation. Julian conversionally 5%. That's a serious situation. It's a serious situation with lately taken all of them. Lately taken White's information to do. I think the partners' way that they shout up unless a serious situation. Julian Mercer has been using your agency as cover for an affair that's destroyed my family. Elaine has been stealing money from our joint accounts to fund their relationship. And both of them have been lying to you about their work activities. Patricia closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. "I'll need to discuss this with our legal team, but I think we can accommodate your request. We can't have employees using company time and resources for personal affairs." "Thank you." "Simmons?" She looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. "I'm sorry this happened to you. Elaine always seems so professional, so committed to her work. People aren't always what they seem. The second call I made was to Julian's landlord, a guy named Pete Kowalski, who owns several apartment buildings around town. Pete was an old friend of Ray's, and he owed us a favor from a case we'd helped them with a few years back." "Julian Mercer?" Pete said, when I explained what I needed. "Yeah, I know him. Rich boy who thinks the rules don't apply to him. What's he done now?" I gave Pete a condensed version of the story, focusing on Julian's financial problems and his habit of using other people's money to fund his lifestyle. "So you're telling me this guy's got gambling debts and no steady income, and he's been lying about his financial situation?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you." "Well, crap. That violates about 6 clauses in his lease agreement. I can have him evicted by the end of the week." "I'd appreciate that, Pete. Consider it done. Guys like that give all landlords a bad name." The third call was the most satisfying. I dialed the number Ray had given me for Vincent Torino, the man Julian owed money to from his poker games. Vincent wasn't exactly a loan shark, but he wasn't the kind of guy you wanted to owe money to either. "Mr. Torino, this is Sam Sullivan. I believe Julian Mercer owes you some money." "Who's asking?" "Who might be able to help you collect it." There was a pause. "I'm listening." "Julian's been telling people he's got a rich girlfriend who's going to solve all his financial problems. What he hasn't mentioned is that the girlfriend is about to lose her job and her source of income." "How do you know this?" "Because I'm her husband, and I'm the one who's making sure she loses everything." Vincent laughed, a sound like gravel in a cement mixer. "You got balls, I'll give you that. What do you want from me?" "I want you to collect what you're owed. Today, before Julian figures out that his gravy train is about to derail. Consider it done." By noon, the trap was closing. Patricia Hoffman had called an emergency meeting with Elaine and Julian, ostensibly to discuss the Henderson account. Pete Kowalski had served Julian with eviction papers, and Vincent Torino was probably having a very interesting conversation with Julian about his outstanding debts. Ray called me at 12:30 with an update. "It's beautiful, Sully, like watching dominoes fall." Julian got fired first, escorted out by security. Elaine lasted about 10 minutes longer before they gave her the boot, too. How'd she take it? About as well as you'd expect. Lots of screaming about wrongful termination and gender discrimination. Didn't do her any good. And Julian? Vincent's boys paid him a visit about an hour ago. Very polite, very professional. Just wanted to remind him that his debts don't disappear just because he lost his job. Restrained a surge of satisfaction. After months of feeling helpless, of watching my marriage crumble while Elaine and Julian played their games, I was finally taking control. "There's more," Ray continued. "Elaine showed up at Julian's apartment about 20 minutes ago. From what I can see through the window, they're having a very animated discussion. About what? Probably about how their perfect plan just went to heck." I was quiet for a moment, thinking about what came next. "Ray, I want you to back off the surveillance now. Whatever happens between them from here on out, I don't need to see it." "You sure?" "I'm sure. This was never about destroying them. It was about making sure they understood there are consequences for their actions." "And Ethan? What are you going to tell him?" I looked out the window at my son, who was in the backyard throwing a tennis ball for our dog. He'd been through enough already. He didn't need to know the details of how his mother's affair had ended. I'm going to tell him that sometimes adults make bad choices, and sometimes those choices have consequences. But that no matter what happens between his mother and me, we both love him. That's good, Sully. That's real good. After I hung up with Ray, I sat in my kitchen and tried to process everything that had happened. 3 days ago, I'd been a man whose wife was cheating on him and whose family was falling apart. Now, I was a man who'd systematically dismantled the lives of the people who'd tried to destroy him. It should have felt better than it did. My phone rang. Elaine's name appeared on the screen. "Hello, Elaine." "You bastard." Her voice was raw, like she'd been crying or screaming. "You destroyed everything." "No, you destroyed everything. I just made sure you faced the consequences. Julian's gone. He left town. Said it was too dangerous to stay here. Smart man. I lost my job, my apartment, everything. You should have thought about that before you decided to humiliate me in front of my family." There was a long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, more vulnerable. "What happens now, Sam? Now you figure out how to rebuild your life, just like I had to do when I found out my wife was cheating on me. What about Ethan? Ethan stays with me. You can see him when you get your life together, but he's not going to be part of whatever mess you've created. Sam, please. I know I made mistakes, but..." "Mistakes?" I felt my anger rising again. "You didn't make mistakes, Elaine. You made choices. You chose to have an affair. You chose to steal money from our family. You chose to try to destroy my reputation to cover your tracks. Those weren't mistakes. They were decisions." She was crying now, and part of me felt sorry for her. But a larger part remembered Julian's voice on that recording, talking about how easy she was to manipulate. And my sympathy faded. "I have to go," I said. "Ethan will be home from school soon, and I want to be here for him." "Sam, wait!" I hung up. That evening, Ethan and I ordered pizza and watched a movie together. He didn't ask about his mother, and I didn't volunteer any information. We were both still figuring out how to navigate this new reality. But as I watched my son laugh at something on the screen, I realized that maybe we were going to be okay. Maybe this was actually a chance for us to build something better, something more honest than what we'd had before. The game was over. Elaine and Julian had lost. And for the first time in months, I was looking forward to tomorrow.